Hello and welcome to this month's painting tutorial. This month we're going to tackle this common sea scene, something that you could see on a tropical island or something like that. So we're going to have some challenges with palm trees. They have these really unique fronds and they're very recognizable, so we have to do a careful job with those. And then a boat in proper perspective. Boats are not that difficult, but this one is foreshortened. So you can see a lot of the front and then it gets really narrow as you go to the back. So that is going to offer some new obstacles as well. So the first thing that I want you to do is to draw the picture on your watercolor paper. So the first thing I want you to do is to draw the painting on the watercolor paper. I've done that to save us some time. And I used a straight edge for my horizon line because when you're painting ocean scenes, the distance water line is usually perfectly straight. Then I have all of my major elements in place here. The boat, the palm trees, the plants aren't quite done, but we don't have to worry about those quite yet. And since they're darker, I know that I can paint the sand and then the leaves on top. So when you're painting watercolors, you want to work from back to front, and that means you're going to start in the sky, the farthest thing in the background, and then move forward gradually. So you're doing the water, then we'll do the sand, and then the trees on the sand, and the boat last of all, because that's the thing that is closest to the foreground. So after drawing those palm trees, you might need to protect some of the highlight fronds, and you can do that with some masking fluid. So I'm just going to open my bottle of masking fluid here, take off the top, and I just really want the centerpieces, the centers of the fronds, and some of those highlight edges. So don't overdo it, and if you can avoid highlighting, for instance, if the background was really light colored, then you could just skip this step. It's always a little bit risky to start using masking fluid because you're creating those artificial edges. And then when it is removed, you might have a hard time blending it into the rest of the painting. So use masking fluid sparingly, but if you need it, it's worth the time to do it right. Boy, this is clogged up. See if this will work. There we go. Some fronds here. I have some fronds here. And always err on the side of not enough. It's better to have less than you need than too much detail. And we tend to over detail things and add too much. So if you think that you don't have enough, stop and rest at least before you go on and add more, so you don't get that artificial look. Just doing a few lines here and there. Okay, I'm gonna let that dry, and then I'm going to also put some masking fluid on these two little metal things on the boat. There, done. Now I'll let that dry and we'll come back and we'll start in that sky. Okay, that masking fluid is dry, so now I have a scrap piece of watercolor paper and I have stamped a square out of the middle of it. And this is what I use to do some color matching. So you can put your square right up against the reference material there. It gives you a really true account when you mix up a color, so you can see how close you're getting. Got a little dark. Try again. That's a little better. Not that it really matters when you're doing a sky, but if you really like to be as precise as possible, that's the way you can do it. All right, then I'm going to start with a fairly wet brush, but white dry paper, and just go right over the top, all the way down. If you have to reload, you can start back in the top, because the water is going to get, it's going to start out darker at the top and then lighten up towards the bottom. Then when I'm right here next to the horizon, I'm going to wash it out, travel nice and slowly. Okay. Then you can go ahead and let that dry. Before I let that dry though, I'm going to break into the corner here with just a little bit of a darker blue to give it a bit more interest. There. The eye likes variations in tone, color, and contrast, so try to do that, both when you're painting and when you're drawing. Okay, so now let's put it away and let it dry. Okay, okay, that sky is dry now, so what I need to do next is to pull out my palm tree. So I'm going to get a flat brush wet with some just clean water, and then go around my pencil lines and just pull out that palm tree a little bit. That way I still have a really smooth background, but the palm tree was just a little bit lighter than this sky in some places will be able to stand forward. So I just rub out the paint like this, and then I'm going to blot it dry with a paper towel. Rinse out the brush and do it again. And the idea here is just to lighten the tone enough that you can paint the other color on top. So if you prefer, you can also protect the palm tree before you start painting, and that's perfectly fine. If the sky were any if the sky were any darker, I would probably have protected the tree first, but I knew that I could just pull it out this way fairly easily and save myself some time. Then if there's anywhere else in those green fronds, things like that, that also need to be lightened, you can do that at this time as well. So I'm just going to use an angled shader brush, a little bit smaller, and pull out some of those fronds. Remember, this is just to pave the way for painting them. So I'm just clearing away some of the darker pigment underneath. No, I'm not doing a lot of details yet. So let me just soften out a few of these fronds and come back to you. Okay, I've lightened up some patches now, and we're going to throw this island in, since it's the farthest thing back other than the sky, this little strip of island. So let me do some color matching. Same way as before. And my sky, in spite of my best interests and my attempts, got a little bit too dark. So my island is going to have to be a little bit darker than this island, otherwise there won't be enough contrast. Yeah, I like this purpley blue. So I'm going to use the largest brush that I can for the area, and just go carefully on the top with the very edge so that I can get an interesting tree line, just like this. And then wash down to the waterline and leave a little bit of a white line at the bottom there. I also see some green at the base here, so I'm going to throw that in as well. It might not look like much right now, but if you get your tones the right shade in this stage, it will really help to add a lot of realism later on. I'm going to do a little bit of skipping around here because there's a palm tree that's going to be in the foreground right over here. So I'll just paint around it. I think I want to raise my tree line up a little bit. And then if you want to make some even smaller little details, use the handle of the brush and you can scratch through some little dots, little tiny lines, things like that. The only really important parts when you're doing the background elements like this is that your color is consistent, and if you use a technique like that brush, make sure that you do it in more than one place. Okay. So we can let that dry. And then I'm going to protect the palm trees because down here the water is lighter colored like the palm tree, and then the sand is lighter colored. So I'm just going to use probably some tape. You could also use Frisket foam, you could use masking fluid, just something to keep the water out of here. I'm just going to use some blue tape. Tear it in half. And then protect my tree. If you don't want it to be as exact as a piece of tape, of course, you can always use the torn side. So there's a palm tree. And then here's a palm tree for up here. So let me finish masking these palm trees and then I'll come back to you. We'll be ready to lay in the next stage. Okay. Got those trees protected and we're ready to lay down some ocean work here. I've also gone through and I've protected some of these small white caps in the waves using my fine line masking fluid pen. And sometimes I would leave those up to chance and just kind of let the painting paint itself. In this case, I went ahead and preserved those whites just because it's so small and those highlights are so important to making it look like moving water. So I went ahead and I erred on the side of preserving those whites, and now I'm going to color match my water. Remember, the water reflects the sky, so the sky and the water are always going to be a close proximity to the same shade, but there should be a little bit of a distinction. So I'm just trying to find the right color family, and that's it. It's a cobalt. It's a cobalt with sort of ultramarine undertones. And some cerulean. I have strong cerulean accents in the sky, so I see a lot of cerulean in the water as well, and then I also have some cobalts farther back. So now I'm just going to go ahead, starting in the back, and I'm going to definitely need to darken this color up because right now this isn't looking distinct enough from the sky. So let me get some more cobalt on the brush, go into it again, very good. And I've protected that tree, so I want to get all of the benefit out of that I can. And I'm keeping just a small line next to the shore. Very, very skinny. But the eye will still see it. So it's dark in the back, and then as I come forward, I can wash out my brush to get more of a transparent look, and I'm going to change to more cerulean. With watercolor, your tendency is going to be, especially as a beginner, to wash out too much color, and then you're going to lose all of your interest, you're going to lose all that color, and basically have to keep starting over again, over and over. And then the more times you add water to your watercolor paintings, the more washed out and dull it becomes. So really try to only wash out the brush when you get to the foreground here. And other than that, paint with a lot of color, because remember, watercolors are going to dry a couple of shades lighter anyway. So however dark you paint them, they're going to dry a little bit lighter still. I don't want any gaps next to the trees, or it will look like the tree was, the water avoids the tree. That's not realistic, so you don't want that. And I have this shoreline. So I like the way that this goes from dark to light, but I think I'd like there to be just a few more indications of some tone change. So I'm going back with a darker brush now, or a darker blue on my brush, and I'm just adding a few little highlights here and there with the very edge of the brush. Don't do too much of this work when your paint is still really wet, because you see how it bleeds out. It's not really the look that I want. If you want sharp edges that are really clear and distinct, then you need to paint dry on dry paper. When you paint on wet paper, you're going to get bleeds. Sometimes you need bleeds, and so you just really need to have both techniques in your, what's that called? Tool chest. Your tool chest of watercolor lessons that you store in your brain. You need to know when you need to paint on wet paper and when you need to paint on dry paper. So now that it's a little bit more dry, I'm just slicing through with a damp brush, and it's going to keep a little bit more of an edge because the paper is just a little bit drier. And that's closer to the look I was going for. But the hardest part of painting watercolors is knowing when to apply the paint and when to let it rest. It's really something that you just learn through experimentation. So the more you paint, the better you become. That's true with everything, but it's really, really true in watercolors, because so much of it depends on just knowing the feel of when it's right to paint. Meanwhile, I'm going to also mix up my sand color. So I'm using some yellow ochre and some burnt sienna. See what color that gives me. That's pretty good. Maybe a little bit cadmium red mixed in there for some peachy undertones. Yeah, that's really good. And then I'm betting that this is already dry enough that I can keep a nice distinct edge if I go up here right next to the boat first, so that that edge is kept really clear. Then I can just wash right over and into the water. And then if you do it right, if you time things correctly, you should be able to get a sense of the sand mixing with the water just like it does in real life. So I'm just working around those leaves really quickly, and then I'll pull it straight down. And this is the lightest color of the sand that I'm painting first. Down here in the foreground, it's even lighter color, so I'm washing out my brush a little bit. And I'm just getting this base tone. Don't even worry about that shadow shape. Paint over everything the same color to begin with. You're going to layer your sand. When I get to the leaf shapes, I'm working around them a bit, at least. But for the most part, I'm just laying everything, I'm laying that sand evenly over everything. And I can go back into it when it's dry and make some of those divots in the sand and the shadows in those divots. But now that quickly we have everything roughed in. So let's let that dry completely, and then we'll come back and start adding the details in the leaves, and then we can take off, oh actually we're gonna have to take off our tape, then do the leaves, because some of those leaves layer over the top of the tree branches. So we'll come back to it and do that. Oh, I've got some of these weird, I forgot, these things are also behind the trees, so I'm going to put those in. They're kind of, I don't know, patches of some kind of sea plant that's floating on the surface there. So just mix up a good color for them, match it to what you see. And then you can just lay them in with the corner of the brush. So focus on the large shapes of that floating plant mat, whatever it is. And make sure that you have at least some interesting edges, so that even if it's not readily identifiable as anything, it still looks interesting. It's kind of the law of art. Make it look interesting. Interesting is more interesting is more important than accuracy, no question about it. So if you have to make a choice, and as an artist you almost certainly will be called on to make the choice between emphasizing accuracy or an interesting, always go for interesting. Remember, this is a visual art form, so it's all about how it looks. Okay. I'm going to drop in some darks into those plants so it doesn't dry completely transparent and wash away. And then we'll let it dry completely. We'll take the tape off and we'll move forward from there. When the background is dry, you can take off the tape or whatever it is that you use to protect the palm branches, the tree trunks here. And then we're going to start to add some details into those palm fronds and the tree trunks at the same time. So really quickly, I can use my wide flat brush, my 1" or 2", and add a light base coat to the palms on the tree trunks here. If there's a highlight side, then you can avoid it. Keep it a little bit brighter. And don't do anything more on that, just let it dry. Then you can mix up a nice dark green, color matching that against what I see for those darkest palm fronds. And I'm just going to start putting them in with the edge of my brush. Let's see how fine my lines can get here. And then for the palms, I just tilt it and I can kind of honeycomb them down like this. Don't make them too regular because you want it to look like the wind is blowing them. I'll do what I can with this brush, and then I can use a small round for some of that other detail. When I have one here and I have one here, and then I have one that goes behind the tree with some branches that stick up and some that stick down. Now just make sure that you don't work over anything important that's supposed to be kept light, because with watercolors, with the transparent watercolors, you don't paint with white paint. So you just need to, that's why I haven't removed the masking fluid from some of these yet. And also remember what I said about interesting shapes. It's more important to be interesting than accurate. It really is. So don't worry about getting every palm frond right. Just worry about making an interesting shape with plenty of darks so that you have a lot of contrast. The eye loves contrast, so make contrasting lines, some thick, some thin, some lost, some really clear and clean, and make some strong contrasting colors, lights and darks, and make sure that you have a definite contrast in things that are far away and things that are close up, so that you get a sense of depth in your paintings as well. Those are just 3 kinds of contrasts, all of which are important to your painting. So I'll be adding a few more palm fronds off camera. Some of those I can add with a round brush as well. So I'll get a little round brush and I'll mix up a lighter shade of green for those lime edges, and then I'm putting the lime ones in the places where I've rubbed out some of that paint, and I want it to be kept lighter because that lime color is too light to lay over the top of these dark blues. So you can vary and alternate between the lights and the darks if you just paint like this. And having the different shades already mixed up is going to be helpful, and then having your 2 brushes that you can go back and forth between is also helpful. So as you paint your palm branches, you can go from dark to light. See here, I'm painting the dark palm fronds with my round brush. And up here I used my straight flat brush. So I'm just like the variation in the look that it gives me. So I'm just going to slowly build those up and do some of that work off camera, like I said. And then also in the tree trunks, I'm going to use a gray, and add some of these shapes that I see here. Again, emphasis on interesting shapes more than accurate shapes. But you do want to get the definite sense of the palm tree. So I have these lines that are pretty strong going around the trunks, and then I have some kind of cool broken up patterns. Up here, most of it is darker, so I'll just run over the top with the brush on the side and darken up some of those flat shapes. Drop in a little bit darker paint. Come back down the tree, the opposite side. Throwing them down like this. Okay. And then on this other tree, the color is quite a bit different. It's a lot darker. So I'm just going to lay it down with a much darker, almost red brown. Take your time on that outside edge. Yeah, it's really dark. And then carefully go through, and you can get a brush a little bit wet and wash it by one side of that, and it will bleed for you. And that way you'll have one line of really strong contrast and one line of interesting bleed. Which looks really cool. And I don't want to mess with it too much. If it looks good, then that's good enough. I've got some of these shadows and the roots down here, and a vague sense of something happening right here. We don't need to overwork that though. So let me go off camera, work on those palm fronds, and come back and we'll do the work in the water and some of these leaves. Then we'll finish up with the boat and the sand.